Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I know it's been a hot minute since I was here making videos for you, but I just couldn't stay away, and so I am back as absolutely much as I can be. I hope to get back onto a regular-ish schedule. So we're gonna jump back into painting by digging a little bit deeper into learning concepts, not just following along to paint the exact same image. So I'm going to be talking about a lot of art concepts, color mixing, etc. So today we're going to start off with this still life, and in the video description below you can find a list of materials, an explanation on my color palette, a link to where you can pick up my brand new brushes. Aren't they beautiful? As well as a link to download the reference image for today's painting. Going forward from here, I hope to continue to bring you a diverse selection of art videos, whether it's learning concepts or step-by-step tutorials, acrylic, oil paint, watercolor, etc. I want to help you learn as absolutely much as you want to learn. So without any further ado, let's get started. Today I am starting with a 16 by 20 inch Frederick's Red Label canvas, and you're welcome to use any size or shape of canvas that you like. Now here you can see my wet palette. This is where I will keep all of the paints that I'm going to be using. So you will see these paints in this palette every single week. And the colors that I'm going to be using, you can see circled here in black. So just because all of these are in my palette doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to be using them. And as we go along, I'll kind of explain that to you a little bit more. So here I'm starting with a little matte medium off to the side, just because it takes over my palette when I put it on there. And I am using one of my new brushes. This is my number 12, so this is the big one. It's about an inch wide. And I'm mixing up ultramarine and raw umber, keeping it a little on the side of ultramarine. I just want to kind of gray that blue down a little bit so it's not so bright. I'm adding a generous amount of matte medium to this because I want it to be pretty transparent. I'm really just going to kind of tone my canvas right now. I'm not doing a thick, opaque underpainting. I'm just kind of scrubbing some of this thinned down color, kind of this grayish blue, onto my canvas. I'm not worried about brush strokes. I'm not worried about it looking tidy. I'm only worried about getting a fairly even coverage across the canvas and covering all of the white spots. Those are really the only things that I'm worried about. And now I'm just taking a clean, dry paper towel and just really wiping that paint in. As you can see, I don't need a thick coverage of paint, just a little bit. I mean, if your coverage ends up being a little bit heavier, that's okay too. Mine, I just need it to be there because I don't want to deal with the white of the canvas. And I know that this grayish blue color gives me a really nice look with shadows. Just taking a paper towel and wiping down the paper in my wet palette. Those marks that you see there, it's just staining. I don't have to worry about those and avoid those as I paint. I'm now moving on to my number 6. This is another one of the brushes in my new line, and I'm just mixing up a very similar color with a little less matte medium, just so it's a little bit more intense of a color. And I like to section my canvas out into halves sometimes when I'm working off of a photo. I'm just cutting it in half. And as you can tell, I'm not being overly precise. The reason I'm doing that is just so I can pay attention to where the center of my image is. So you can see here my reference image, which you're able to download from my website. I've also sectioned it in half. And my composition is going to be different than this image, but I just want to know where the center is on my canvas so that I don't accidentally put the most important part of the image directly in the center. Just checking my tabletop there, making sure it's the same distance from the bottom of the canvas. Doesn't have to be real precise right now, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't like, you know, an inch off. That would make for a really wonky tabletop. Basically, all I'm doing right now is just with really light pressure with this brush, I'm sketching out the little elements that I can see in my painting. I'm not trying to be overly precise. I'm just kind of looking at how they relate to each other and sketching them on in a general way. So again, my composition is going to turn out quite a bit different than what's on this image. But when we're working from an image, that doesn't mean that our painting has to come out looking just like that image. You are not beholden to that image. It's a starting point. Think of it as a starting point for you. And anything you don't like about that image, you can absolutely change. And you can see here, I'm just very lightly sketching. You do not want dark, thick, heavy paint at this point because it's going to be very difficult to make changes to. It's going to be very difficult to cover up later. So you want to make sure that you use a good amount of matte medium so that the color is thin, and I'm barely touching the canvas, so I'm just applying just a little bit of paint. If there is texture to your paint, it's way too thick. Wipe it with your hand or something. See, I'm just changing, kind of playing with the shape of that plate, and so it's a little messy looking, but that's all right. Now notice what I'm doing here with my grapes. I am not coming in and making circles and saying grape, 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 grape. I'm just kind of generally outlining where those grapes are going to be. That's really all that is. Same thing here, I'm kind of finding my pear shapes. And I think my composition is mainly different than the image because I made my pears larger. I felt like, I don't know, I felt like they were kind of small in the image, and I wanted them a little bit larger, a bit more eye-catching. So that's why my composition ends up shifting a little bit closer to the center. But the weight of my subject, which is the pears, is to the right of the center. So it's okay that it touches the center line. But if that area where the pears overlap each other, if that were dead center, that would be a bad thing. So that's just kind of what I'm looking for here. Notice I drew the entire second pear so that I could see where it is through that forward pear. That's to help me make sure that I'm getting the shape as close to accurate as possible. Kind of solidifying where my plate is. As you can see, that line is a little bit firmer and crisper because I'm committing to that line. I'm saying this is where my plate is. And now the fabric. Honestly, the fabric in this image is what made me want to paint this image in the first place. I thought this looks like a really nice challenge, and so that's what led me to download this image. And I got this one off of Shutterstock, so it's an image I had to pay for. So if you need this image, just download it off of my website. I've cropped it. I've got it there for you with and without the lines, so whatever you like. Now, when you're doing fabric, or really anything, this is a really important part that I want you to remember. No matter what you're painting, I want you to stop looking at it as a three-dimensional object. So I don't want you looking at this fabric thinking, well, how am I going to make it look like this part's standing up and this part's curved under? Don't look at it like that. This is not a piece of fabric that you're painting. It's a two-dimensional image of colors and shapes, and that's it. If you pay attention to the colors that you see, the shapes that you see, the hard edges and the soft edges, that's really all you need to do to be able to paint anything. So what I'm doing here right now is I'm taking a slightly thicker version of that blue-gray color, and I'm putting it where I see the shadows on that fabric. That's it. I don't have to worry about the shadows being accurate. I don't have to worry if I go too dark or not dark enough. But the reason I'm doing this right now is because it's giving me a roadmap to paint on top of later. And I know that this is a concept that is probably new to a lot of you. This is one of those kind of traditional oil painting techniques that I mentioned in my Facebook and Instagram post that I was going to be teaching you. When I learned how to do this at first, it kind of seemed pointless to me, as I imagine it does to a lot of you. You think, why am I going to go and paint this entire image essentially in monochrome, black and white, or blue and white in this case? Paint the entire image like that, only to come back and paint on top of it again. Well, think about painting something that you're not familiar with. So this fabric, for instance. If we didn't do this, then you would have to come to it not only with the color mixture that you want to use, but you would also have to be considering your values, value meaning how light or how dark your paint is. And so you'd be mixing the color and trying to decide how dark it should be at the same time. But right now, this is kind of my roadmap. I'm figuring out my composition. Oh yeah, that's another thing you'd have to do. Your color, your value, and your composition and shapes and details and all that. You'd have to figure all of that out at the exact same time. But right now, I have the luxury of figuring out the composition, the value, the detail, all of that, when it doesn't really matter because I am going to paint on top of it. But like I said, it's kind of a roadmap. So when I come back to start painting on top of it, I will know, oh, this spot right here needs to be darker. This spot over here needs to be lighter. I don't have to stop and look at my image and think, oh, I have to make this color darker somewhere in this area. I've got that all laid out for me. So that's exactly what I'm doing here. Now I'm refining the shape of the pear and I'm adding my shadow into that. I know it seems strange to shadow a yellow pear with ultramarine blue, but that's the glorious thing about acrylic paint, right? It covers. So this blue won't show unless I want it to. But I also find the ultramarine makes a really nice shadow color if it does happen to show. I told you guys when I was coming back that we were going to focus on learning. I no longer want to, do the thing where it's like, take this color, put it right here. Now take this color and put it right here. That doesn't teach you how to paint. That teaches you, it's essentially paint by number without the numbers. And I'm not interested in that anymore. I want to help you become the artist that you want to be. And some of you have different goals, and some of you may not be interested in learning the intricacies of, how to make the decisions in painting. You may just want to know how to paint a specific image, and that's perfectly fine. These videos are going to be more for people who do want to know, why am I using this weird blue color and painting my image seemingly twice, and how can it help you in future paintings that you might want to attempt on your own. I'm just kind of blocking in those grapes right now. Again, there's no detail. I'm still not giving them any real specific shape. Just like before when I was making videos, I still like to work in layers. And because I like to work in layers, I know that as I go, those grapes will start taking on shape. So right now they don't need to have any real specific shape. Right here on this second pear, the one that's laying down, if you notice in the reference image, the shadow on the underside of the pear and the shadow on the plate are almost the same darkness. You almost can't tell where one stops and the other begins. So don't worry if you lose that line between them. Going back to my number 12, my largest brush, mixing up that blue-gray and starting to add some white, I'm going to start painting in the wall. And in my image, my reference image, the wall and the cloth are very, very similar in color. But I'm going to change that just a little bit, as you'll see as we go. So this color right now is much bluer than what's in my reference image, and that's okay. So I'm just laying that in there. Flat pressure lays the paint down like that, and then lighter pressure kind of helps spread it and blend it. And I am in love with this brush, you guys. It lays down paint like you wouldn't even believe. Mix up a little bit more of that color, maybe a little bit extra brown in it this time, just to gray down that blue a little bit more. Tiny bit more white. And I need to put out some more matte medium. My matte medium over there is dry. This brush, because it's a filbert, as I blend, you don't really get a lot of brush marks from it, and it blends really smoothly. I'm really in love with this brush. See there, now I'm starting to cut around the grape shapes just a little bit more, kind of making some of those little shapes a little bit more rounded. Don't forget the wall underneath the table. And right here, if your table was a little bit wonky, a little bit crooked, as we fill in the wall, you can make adjustments to that. Now let's darken this color some more. Still more brown. As I move toward the right-hand side of the canvas, I'm going to make the wall get a little bit darker and a little bit more gray toward the brown. And I'm not worried about brush marks. I'm not worried about the wall being perfect at this point, because I am going to come back and do, I think, one more layer. If you can still see some of your sketch lines through this at this point, it's okay. Please don't stress over that. By trying to cover those lines right now, by really trying overly hard to do anything at this point, you're going to overwork your paint and kind of stress yourself out. So really, I'm just getting the color and the value that I basically want on this wall. I'm not worried about it being perfect. I'm not worried about any of those lines showing at all. Just getting my color and my value on there. So a wet palette, this is a new thing for me in videos. I've been using a wet palette now for quite a while with acrylic paint. And if you're interested in learning more about a wet palette, let me know, and I will either make a blog post or a video or something about it to give you information on wet palettes. They're pretty convenient things. You can buy them anywhere, or you can make your own as well. See, that color was even lighter than what I'm putting over there, but I didn't stop and remix it or worry about it because I want this wall to have a little bit of activity on it. I feel like if things are too smooth, too perfect of a blend, too much of a gradient, I feel like they look flat and boring. I like there to be a little bit of brush texture. I like there to be a little bit of vibration in the colors. You know, if you've got temperatures that shift, so you've got like a more blue brush stroke to a more brown brush stroke, or a darker brush stroke next to a lighter brush stroke, creates a little bit of vibration and life to the element. And I know it's just a wall, but that doesn't mean that it needs to be flat and dead and boring. So, you know, how do I get smooth blends? That's something I get asked about a lot. And honestly, my answer is don't get smooth blends. Smooth blends can be very boring. They can be very, very boring. But also when you work in layers like I am here, see, I'm putting that light color on top of dry paint. But because I'm using a little matte medium to thin the paint down, and I'm using a very soft touch around the edges of those brush strokes, it appears to be blended in, even though it's really not. So if you have a hard time getting smooth transitions, we're going to call them transitions, not blends, but if you have a hard time getting a smooth transition, I want you to use a little bit of matte medium and work in layers. So there, this color is much more brown and a little bit darker. This painting is actually a painting that I have done before. I have an oil painting workshop that I have coming up. It's not going to be here on YouTube. It's going to be several hours long. Several hours long, probably upwards of 10 hours long. So it's going to be a workshop that I sell for oil painting, and this is one of the paintings that I did in that workshop. So if you're interested in oil paint at all, I hope you will check that out. This is my number 4 brush, and I'm mixing ultramarine and cad red medium with a little bit of this PR101 or transparent red oxide, whatever brand it is you're using for this one. I'm just looking for a chromatic black that I can push towards warm. So I put a little bit of yellow oxide in there because this is going to be the dark color for my table. So that kind of reads as black at this distance, but it's a very, very warm color. It's kind of a dark mahogany color. So using a limited palette like I am, again, I've chosen all of these colors because I'm familiar with them. I know what they do. I know that I can get any color that I might need in a painting. And I don't have to memorize how to get a color like this. I just know through experience, which you will gain, I know through experience that ultramarine and cad red medium do not make a bright purple. They make a very dark chromatic black. And so that's why I went straight to those colors. From there, I can adjust it however I want. I got my black, but I need it to look a little bit more earthy and brown. So I throw in that yellow ochre, yellow oxide, whatever brand you're using. They're always called something different. And a little bit of that PR101 to shift it toward that wood color again as well. So I don't want you to stress out about, oh, I didn't catch what color she mixed in there, or how much color did you use of this or that. Really, it's about grabbing whatever color you feel like is going to start shifting toward what you need. And we'll do a much more in-depth color theory lesson soon. If it really stresses you out trying to, mix random colors until you get a color that you like, then you're free to use, tube colors that you're familiar with, that will give you a similar color. There's nothing wrong with that. I do hope that you will work on your color mixing with me so that you can become a strong color mixer, and you can just take a limited palette like this and get any color you need. Now there, I lightened my color a little bit for the foreground because it's taking a little bit more light, and I used the Titan green from Golden to do so. And the reason I picked that color is because I know that green is going to kind of counteract the red in this color, and I didn't want this color to get too vibrant. I felt like adding some white might bring out the pink in this color too much. But if you don't have Titan green, you absolutely can just use white and adjust it if you need to. Now, ultramarine and the PR101, that transparent red color, red-brown. A little bit of my Titan violet just to counteract the blue a little bit. So it's just a nice cool gray. The PR101 and ultramarine do give me a bit of a different gray than the ultramarine with the raw umber. And I want that because this is going to be the color of the cloth on my table, and I don't want the cloth on my table to be exactly the same color as the wall behind it, so that's why I used a different brown. This is a pretty light color, so really I'm just going to come in here and start putting it down in my lightest areas, the areas where I left a lot of the bright white space. And I'm still looking at my reference image and just kind of putting this color where I feel like I see light. Now up close you can see how much more brown this color is than the color on the wall. And I apologize, you guys. I haven't done this, the recording a video. I haven't done this in so long, so I do forget that my camera is zoomed in here for a second, and you're gonna miss a bit, but all I'm doing is exactly what you see here. It's just on the rest of the fabric, and I figure it out pretty quick, so you don't miss a whole lot. But notice I'm skipping around most of the dark area, but very general. My brush strokes are very soft. I'm not creating any hard edges except, a little bit on the edge of the towel, but inside, very soft, very thin application of paint. Leave your dark areas showing for the most part. You put them there because you need them, so don't cover them up and make them pointless. I am paying attention in my reference image to where I see crisp and soft lines within the folds of the fabric. That's one of the things that's going to make it seem like fabric. If all of your brush strokes have very crisp edges, it's not going to look like fabric, because fabric curls are a combination of crisp edges and soft edges. So really make sure that you're paying attention to that and putting the soft ones where you see them and putting the crisper ones where you see them. It's just more of that same color. Sometimes I might shift it a little bit warmer, sometimes a little bit cooler. Again, it's just about creating that vibration of color, not having everything all of your colors seem so static and perfectly similar. That's not how things are in real life. A red tablecloth spread across a table is not going to be exactly the same color and temperature and value in every single place. So your paint mixtures don't have to be exact every single time you pick it up. See how I have a crisp edge along the top there? And it's softer toward the bottom of that roll. That already kind of made that roll stand up and say that it's kind of a fold in the fabric. Notice how loosely I'm holding my brush. I'm holding it very lightly. That helps me have I can control the pressure and the direction of my brush strokes more. If you crank down on your brush and you're holding it very tightly, all of your brush strokes are going to be very heavy, very thick, and very directional. So really loosen up and let your brush strokes be a little bit more fluid and you know, look a little less controlled, because it's going to give your painting a little bit more life, I promise. All right, there, I figured it out. I just mixed up a little bit of a darker version. It shifted a bit more toward brown. It has less of that Titan violet in it, which you can just use titanium white. That is a-okay. And what I'm doing now is I'm putting it in some of those darker areas and then lightly blending it in with some of that lighter paint. It's just kind of scumbling. It's almost dry brushing. I'm not applying thick, heavy paint. And I'm avoiding my darkest areas. So you won't really see me putting this color into the folds on the fabric that appear to be black. I'm kind of going for those mid-value areas. If you look at your fabric in the reference image, think of it as being 3 values. You've got your highlight, your darkest shadow, and everything in between. So this color I'm doing now is pretty much for the everything in between bit. Again, just keep paying attention to your shapes and your colors, your crisp lines and your soft lines, and you will absolutely be able to paint this fabric. Before I painted this in oil for my oil workshop, I had never painted fabric like this before. And like I said, I thought it would be a good challenge, and it really wasn't any harder than painting anything else because I didn't look at it as a piece of fabric. See, heavy pressure to put that paint down, and then just up onto the edge on the side of the brush to spread it around and blend it in with the dry paint around it. I know this looks so messy and scattered right now, but that's what layers are for. So when you get to that ugly stage in your painting and you think, God, I have just really made a mess of this, just keep going. It's okay. It will come together, I promise. And if your color is a little too dark or a little too light for an area, just keep going. Don't stress it. Layers will fix everything. Just lightening that color up a tiny bit. this area is not quite that dark. So as we go through this painting, because I'm mixing colors on the fly and you'll be mixing colors on the fly, our paintings are going to end up looking a little bit different from each other. And I want you to remember that that's okay. We are different artists, we're different people, we're using different materials at different times in different parts of the world. There's no reason that our paintings have to be exactly the same. The goal of my videos is not to show you how to paint exactly what I'm painting, to paint exactly like me, and if you haven't painted exactly like me, you've failed. That is absolutely not the case. I want to teach you some different techniques, and we're using this painting as a vehicle for that, and I want you to use those techniques however works best for you, and come up with something that is all you. That's what art is. Art is about creating something that expresses who you are. You can't express who I am, and I can't express who you are. Only you can do that. Now I've mixed up an even darker color. Still used the same two, the blue and the brown that I was using before, with much less white in it. And I'm laying it into the areas that look almost black in my reference image. And I'm using a little more of the brown to help shift that blue closer toward a chromatic black. Just a tiny bit of matte medium to help my paint flow. I love this little dark, dark, dark shadow area right under the plate there. So I'm going to pay some special attention there and make sure I really get that shape and value in. And over here it's nice and dark. And I think you can already see how the shapes and the values and the colors are coming together, and it's starting to look like a delicate fabric draped on this table. I think in the reference image it looks like a heavy towel, but I like the idea that mine looks a little bit more silky. And by dry brushing, by not having a ton of paint on my brush, I can very lightly dry brush this super dark color over other areas to make adjustments. You'll see in a minute where I even dry brush a bit of this color on top of some of my lightest area, just to introduce some texture or to darken it a little bit. Nice and dark right there to really make that curl on the edge of the towel stand up. Don't worry if you really can't tell where the towel ends and the wall begins back there in that corner. That corner is not important to the overall composition of the painting. If you put too much attention there and really make that corner different from the wall, I think it's going to call too much attention to it, and you'll find yourself looking at it and wondering, why am I looking at this part? It's not important. So if they blend in, it's okay back there. Just dry brushing a little bit of this darker color there, just to deepen the shadow in that area. All right, clean brush. Let's start working on our pears. I'm going to pull some Cad Yellow Medium, some PR 101. Nope, sorry, that's Cad Yellow Light. Sorry about that. And a little bit of cerulean to push that yellow slightly toward green. A little bit of my Titan Green to keep it a little bit grayed down, not make the color too vibrant. See how I'm just kind of taking a bit of this, a bit of this, a bit of that, until I get a color that looks like what I want. Just scumbling that through the brightest area of my pear. Again, I'm not worried about covering all of those lines in there. I know they'll be covered, so I don't need to worry about it right now. I don't want this paint to be too terribly thick, so I'd rather have those sketch lines show than completely cover them at this point. Now, please remember the PR 101, I call it that because that's the pigment in it. It's transparent and the pigment is PR 101. Every single brand of paint, almost every single brand of paint has a transparent PR 101 in their line, but every single one of them calls it something different. So that's why I'm just referring to it by the pigment name. I'm using the Utrecht Artists brand for that color, and it's called Burnt Sienna. It is not Burnt Sienna. If you buy Burnt Sienna in any other line, it is not going to be this color. That's why I'm not calling it Burnt Sienna, because that would be really confusing. If you're using golden, I believe it's called Transparent Iron Red Oxide. If you're using Liquitex, it is called Transparent Burnt Sienna. So just look for a color in whatever line you're using that is transparent, and the pigment code is PR 101. And if that's just way too complicated for you, then just use Burnt Sienna. It is opaque. It will look a little bit different, but it will be fine. You can get away with just using Burnt Sienna if looking for this transparent version is just too much effort, which I totally understand. But it's a color that I cannot live without. It's in almost every single painting that I do. And I tried to not bring it into this palette for these videos because I knew that that could be confusing for you. But ultimately, it's just a color that I really cannot do without it. So I had to bring it in and just hope that I can talk you through the confusing bit so that we can all be on the same page together. Just mixing up more of that same color, just slight different balances of the colors. This one has a little more cerulean in it. And notice I am not picking up any of that color from the paper on my palette. That's just stain on the paper, so don't worry about that. Now I am applying it a little bit heavier, really focusing on the shape of my pears. Some of those lines are starting to get covered up now. Notice I kept that yellow away from my darkest shadows, because now I know where my darkest shadows are going to be, so I don't have to paint the entire pear yellow and then try and force that yellow back at a later time. I just didn't put that color into my darkest area. Let's warm it up a little bit more. Tiny bit of that ultramarine, it kind of helps neutralize the PR 101 so that it's not so vibrant and warm. I want a very grayed down, darker color here. And I'm going to start into my shadows, just gently. Keep an eye on your reference image so that you're not putting this color that's too light into your darkest area. We're just starting to work toward the darkest area. Plop down that paint with heavy pressure and then dust it out with the edge of the brush. Heavy pressure right there to get crisp, heavy paint. Soft pressure to dust it out. Watch that line. Get that line dusted out immediately. Don't leave it there for too long. That's one of the nice things about oil paint that I've discovered is I can just go and lay down all of my colors and then come back and break up lines. I've been painting with oil paint a lot lately and I've really fallen in love with it. I do hope to bring you guys some oil painting videos. I know that not everybody likes oil painting and I'm probably going to hear complaints about it, but you know, I'm trying to be a little bit more honest with myself, you know, and who I am as an artist and just kind of honoring that a little bit more. And so I probably will be bringing some of those things to you as well. And I quit making videos for about a year, and part of it was because there were things that I wanted to do that I didn't feel like I could do in videos because I knew that a lot of my audience wouldn't like it. But, you know, ultimately I love teaching and I wanted to get back to you. But the only way that I could do that is by, you know, being who I am and painting the things that I want to paint. And if one day I want to make a video in acrylic, I'll do that. If one day it's oil, I'll do that. And hopefully someone will like to come along. I just grabbed some of that super dark color that was on my palette and I'm throwing that into my darkest area on my pear, and I know that color is not glorious. It's not the right color. It is the right value though, so I'm just going with it. So if your pear at this point looks like it's been smashed, run over by a truck, rotting in the parking lot for a month, it's really okay. Just make sure that your value is right. Just getting that dark color where I know I want my pear to be dark. That's more important than the right color. The color can be adjusted, but we really need to make sure our value is where it needs to be. And I'm not worried about the shadow getting too big because my lighter color is going to be more opaque and it will easily cover it. So now I'm mixing up alizarin and ultramarine, and it gives me a chromatic black that leans ever so slightly toward violet. And I'm toning that violet down with a little bit of raw umber because our grapes are purple, but they are not like diox purple, like purple. So I'm just going to fill in my shape, and I can't remember what size of brush I'm using here. It's either the 4 or the 6. It really doesn't matter. Use whatever shape you are comfortable with. Notice how I'm using my brush on the edge to create the rounded shapes. So I'm still not in here, you know, going grape, but I'm using the edge of my brush and kind of pivoting my arm to create kind of natural rounded shapes. I'm not trying to make those shapes look like grapes. I'm not trying to make them relate to each other in any particular way. I can still make changes to the edge because my wall isn't finished. So I'm just generally starting to create some rounded tops for some grapes. And otherwise, I'm just filling the shape in with this color. There's no detail within this shape at all right now. Just mixing up some more. It's okay if it leans more blue or more red or even more brown at this point. Just like always, that's why I like to do the small batch mixes, because I like having the variation. I like, you know, having the possibility that my brush strokes are going to be slightly different colors each time. Make sure to take those grapes down onto the plate. Again, in the reference image, where the grapes are on the plate, the shadow is really deep and it's hard to tell where the grapes stop and the plate begins, but allow that. I know the temptation is there to make that a very distinct thing, to say, this is grapes, this is plate, because we feel like it's going to be confusing if you can't see where they, you know, transition from one to the other. But I promise your brain will understand it. It can just be a dark area with little to no form or color definition. Your brain will understand what's going on in there. See, I'm bringing that color down onto the plate, not trying to make grape shapes, just getting it so that it looks like the grapes are laying on the plate. Clean brush, picking up some cerulean, some raw umber, just getting kind of this grayish brown. Cerulean, it's hard to make a chromatic black with cerulean, but what it does is it really softly grays colors down, especially brown. It just creates a really velvety color that I really like. And I'm using this color, I'm pretty sure this is my number 4. It's my sample brush, that's why it looks different. But I'm using this color on the plate, and I know it's very similar to the towel, but I'm not too worried about it. I think in the end, everything, you can tell what's what in the end, so I'm not terribly worried about it. Just creating the edge to that plate. It's a little brighter right now all the way around than I ultimately want it, but that's okay because I need to know where that edge is. I can go back and tone it down in little bits when I need to. Yeah, I'm using my sample brushes in this painting because I hadn't yet received my brushes when I was making it, so I was just using my samples from when I was getting them made. But my brushes are in now. They are actually available on my website right now, well, as of when this video first airs. Afterwards, there may be some that are out of stock or all of them temporarily out of stock, but just be patient. If they're out of stock, they will come back. I darkened that color ever so slightly, and I'm looking really closely at my image and finding little tiny places on my plate where I can see some light. The majority of the inside of this plate is very dark, but there's a couple places where I can see a hint of light, like right between those pears toward the back of the plate, and at the back on the right of the plate behind the main pear. Mixing off to the side here because I'm going to change this color a little bit, make it a little bit more brown, just let that cerulean gray it a little, and let the ultramarine dull the brown. So those two blues, they're going to do very different things to that raw umber. That's why I'm using both of the blues with the brown, creating that shadow color. Remember I said that cerulean, it's really challenging to get a chromatic black, a nice dark color with the cerulean. So that's what the ultramarine was for. The ultramarine helps push it toward that chromatic black. But I still wanted the cerulean in there because it brings that soft, velvety grayness to the raw umber. And I think maybe next I will do just a pretty basic color mixing video with this palette so that you can get some quick experience knowing what these colors do to and for each other. Just pushing it a little darker with some more umber and ultramarine, because right here where those grapes are, remember I said you can't really tell where the grapes and the plate meet because they're both so dark. So that's what I'm doing in here. Not even trying to create rounded shapes for the grapes, just letting those two elements blur into each other. Creating a crisp line at the rim of the plate there. Never be afraid to put your finger in the paint and smear it. It's a very helpful thing to do, especially if you get paint that is really thick, kind of a blob that you know is going to be hard to deal with later. Just smear it, wipe it with your finger. I like to use the gloves in a bottle when I'm painting because it helps create a little bit of a barrier on my skin so that, you know, you're not absorbing chemicals. You can use that, or you can wear actual gloves, but don't let the fear of paint stop you from sticking your fingers in the paint when you need to. Back to that slightly lighter grayer color, filling in the rest of this plate. And just like the towel, I know the plate looks really messy and brush strokey and strange right now, but this is just the kind of the starting point. Back to my number 8. This is a larger brush. I'm mixing up that ultramarine and raw umber. A little bit of my Titan Violet. Again, you can just use regular white if that's all you have. I like the Titan Violet because it's introducing a hint of warmth to this background. See how those brush strokes, they're a little bit lighter, but they're also a little bit more toward pink. And I think that that's a really fun and subtle change. I'm not trying to cover all of this. Again, it's about creating that vibration, the difference in the temperatures of the colors. Little matte medium. Just makes blending into dry paint a little bit easier. Plop down that paint with a heavy pressure, super soft pressure. See that? I'm on the edge of my brush, and that will help dust it around. If you're using the flat pressure the whole time, all you're doing is laying down paint, and it's going to feel like you're having a really hard time blending because you're not blending, you're just applying. So get your pressure, figure out how to get that pressure under control. A really soft touch is what's going to blend. That hard pressure just applies. Make sure you get right up to your grapes. You don't want a halo around your grapes where you were afraid to get up and get too close to them. And if you had some shapes in your grapes that were strange, this is your opportunity to smooth that out. Also notice that a lot of my sketch lines, they're starting to disappear. My sketch lines are about gone. I believe with this layer, I get rid of all the sketch lines. Just changing that color ever so slightly. I believe this is a little more toward brown and a little bit darker than that last layer. Right over that sketch line, and it is gone. Taking the opportunity to shape those grapes a little bit more. A little more on the brown side. Adjusting my pear shape if I need to. These Filberts, even though like this one is quite large, they have a really nice point. The bristles, they thin out really nicely toward the point, so they hold a really crisp edge so you can really get into some tiny delicate spaces, which is another reason I like these synthetic bristles over natural bristles. Natural bristles tend to just kind of puff out and it's hard to get much crispness and detail with them, but these ones do a really nice job of that. Slightly darker color. Look at, you can still see the original bluer color that I put on there. All throughout here we've got that kind of texture, but there's still, you know, a general fade from a lighter side on the left to a darker side on the right. But I didn't have to worry about blending. There's really no blending here. A little bit lighter and warmer with that pink. Just kind of getting just a few more spots with some of that warmer color, just very gently scattering it through here. Letting the texture exist. I like the texture. I like that this almost looks like a cloudy sky, and really you can use this exact same brushwork and colorwork technique that I'm doing here. This could be a sky. You could paint a sky in this exact same way. And we probably will at some point. All right, back to my number 4. And I am going to start with some ultramarine into this dark patch. Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's just ultramarine and PR 101, and it is. So nice and dark, but we're gonna lighten it a little bit. Tip it a little bit away from the blue and closer to gray. Just looking for a nice neutral gray that's about mid-tone. And let's work on our tablecloth again. Now I'm using this smaller brush because I'm starting to really kind of home in on my details. I want to be able to work in intricacies. So this is kind of in between that lightest color and the mid-tone color. And I'm just almost dry brushing it. So again, it looks like we're blending into wet paint, but we're really not. We're just painting on top of dry paint. So kind of plopping some of that color down and then lightly scumbling it out and dry brushing it over top of the next color. And that's how we're gonna get that blend between them. And it brings a little bit of texture to the fabric because again, fabric, even like satin or silk, it's not flat and textureless. You know, if you glance at it, there's a little bit of texture to fabric. And so we want to bring that here. We don't want this perfectly slick blend. It's going to make it look like metal or plastic or something, and we don't want that. Just lightened it a little bit, starting to brighten up my brighter areas. Still not going for my brightest color just yet. Don't come charging in here with the color as pale as you want it, because there's nowhere to go from there, and the whole thing is going to end up being too light. Nice crisp curl here with a soft fade on the underside. Now I may complete my fabric or any other element in this painting in, 2 or 3 layers. But if you're doing it and it takes you 5 or 6 or 10 or 85 layers to get it looking the way you want it, please don't take that as any indication that you are doing this wrong, or you don't know what you're doing, or you're wasting time or paint, or any of the other feelings that you might have with that. Please remember that sometimes I do a lot fewer layers and sometimes I do a lot more. It depends on who I am that day and how I feel and how I approach the painting. But also remember that I do this a lot. I mean, this is my job. This is what I do for a living. So I may have a lot more practice at this than you, and I'm able to achieve it in just a few layers, where it might take you a lot more. It used to take me a lot more than it does now. And like I said, sometimes it still does take me a lot more. So it's not an indication of anything. It just takes you as many layers as it takes, and it takes me as many layers as it takes, and one is not better than the other. Still just working on my highlight areas, kind of drilling down into the details. Some of the areas that were maybe a little too dark, or the dark area was too big, I'm kind of pushing that back in a little bit. And I might make some of my highlight areas too big, but I'll come back with my dark and kind of push those highlight areas back a little bit. So it really is a game of push and pull. The layer you're working on right now is probably always going to be too much, whether it's too big, too light, too dark, whatever. It's going to be too much. But your next layer is going to push that back a little. And it's just that interplay between layers until finally you arrive at the place where you want to be. My favorite part of this towel is that edge along the left. Really let your brush kind of wobble. See how my line there is kind of wobbly. It's not this perfectly straight crease. It's a little wobbly, and that gives it that really delicate fabric look. See that shadow there, right there, is so dark and so aggressive. But all I'm going to do in just a little bit is dry brush a bit of this lighter color over it. Like I'm doing right here. That shadow was a bit much. Just dry brushed a little over it, and it kind of kicked it back a bit. A little bit darker. I used the wrong brown there, but it's really not a big deal. I used the raw umber when originally I was using the PR 101, but it really doesn't matter. Just softening some of these brush strokes over here and kind of making the shadows and the highlights a little bit more integrated rather than so sketchy and separate. I made that quite bright on that corner, but I believe I come back later and scumble some darker over it so it's not quite so bright and vibrant. learn to really look at your reference image and see, not see what is in the image, but see the individual elements. So when you look at the reference image, I don't want you to see a table with a cloth, with a plate, with pears, with grapes against a wall. I want you to see this kind of rectangular shape with a lighter edge around the top and the right, like we have in the corner there, that fold in the fabric with a hard dark line on the left. That's a shape with the color and everything. And you know where the curl is, it's a hard line that moves down this way and it's softer down the other way. That's how you make the curl. If you approach it trying to figure out how you're going to make this three-dimensional cloth look three-dimensional in a two-dimensional space, you're going to make yourself crazy. You have to look at it as if it is just a two-dimensional thing, which really it is, because you're looking at a photograph, which is two-dimensional. Nice dark color here. Very, very dark. I want to really start kicking in those dark, dark shadows, because that is what helps me know how much farther I need to take my highlights and kind of where everything is standing. So I mixed up that color. It was pretty much just ultramarine and PR 101. And I'm getting this into my darkest areas and then dry brushing a little bit over some other areas to darken them a little bit and kind of assimilate them in. See there, that's a pretty light area, but I'm dry brushing this dark color over it. It's just a very light touch. I have a good amount of paint. See that? I almost put down too much paint because I put pressure on my brush. So just a very light scumble and you'll lay down the right amount of paint. See how much paint was on that brush? Right here we do have a little bit of a darker shadow, so I'm going to actually mix this color up a little bit darker still, because it's not quite giving me the darkness that I need in that little fold. And that's just a shape that's kind of crisp on the bottom and blends upwards. Nice and dark in there. That is one of my darkest shadows on the fabric. And really set it apart from the plate. Dust it out right there to open up that little fold. Nice and dark right there and right there. I love that little piece of the fabric that's poking up. So when I painted this, I thought, you know what, I need to get a bunch of different colors and types of fabric, and I just really want to experiment painting different bits of fabric and trying to render the folds and the colors and everything. So I may end up doing that. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to do it in videos and make you paint rolled up fabric constantly, but we may do it again at some point, and maybe I'll just do it and kind of show you what I did. Right here against that kind of wobbly edge, Notice I'm dry brushing ever so slightly, a little bit of a darker line. That's to indicate the area on the fabric that's folded over and sewn. And you can see that the little seam edge in the image, but I'm definitely not going to go in here and like draw a hard line and draw individual threads. We're just giving an indication that that's there with a slight shadow color. Much lighter color now. It's just that same gray mixture on my brush, but I mixed it into quite a bit of white. I'm really going to start amping up my highlights. As I get lighter and lighter and start working toward my very lightest color, I start applying the paint a little bit heavier, a little bit thicker, especially here on the edge. I'm really daubing some thicker paint onto here to keep it nice and bright and kind of adding some details, little ripples to the edge of that fabric. It's just one little brush stroke, see? Just like that. And now the fabric has some of those little bumped up ripples on the edge. Nice and bright there. Nice and bright over here. And lightly scumble that into a little bit of the shadow. Just to keep that fabric texture going. A little darker there than I want. So I just scumbled a bit of that lighter color over it. Nice and bright right up there, that little fold that's standing up. I'm applying that paint quite a bit heavier. And just streaking out hard lines. I'm not scrubbing out the thick paint. I'm just kind of softening any hard lines. And I believe we're almost done with this fabric. I think I just need to kind of kick in the dark shadows one last time, get rid of some of that blue that's showing through the shadow, and really knock those shadows in. And that will really make the highlight stand out more. If your highlights aren't highlighty enough, if they're not bright enough, but you've gone white, your paint is white, but your highlights aren't bright enough, it's probably an indication that your shadows aren't dark enough. And definitely here, my highlights are not appearing light enough for me. So, but I already know that it's because my shadows aren't dark enough. But it's all a process. If I went straight to my shadows as dark as I wanted them, I would have a really hard time coming back from that. But let's work on our pears again for a little bit. This is my number 6. Just starting with some cad yellow. I've wiped off my paper here. I'm gonna throw a little Indian yellow in there because it's super, super warm. So it's gonna help kind of warm up this color without changing it too much. Drop in a little cerulean to kind of take it toward a nice warm green. It looks much more green on this paper than it looks on my canvas. A little bit of raw umber to just kind of quiet down the vibrancy. See, it's not quite as green on my palette. Also, because I'm super out of practice for recording, you know, I'm struggling with some things that I used to be able to do, you know, just fine, like thinking about my lighting and all of that. So I appreciate you being patient with me while things are imperfect. It's been at least a year since I recorded, and so it's a little bit of a process getting back into it. But I've already started recording my next video, and I can tell you that my lighting is already better in that video. So thank you for bearing with me through better and worse. Just kind of getting some of this greener color into our pear. Pears are not just a solid color, you know, with a shadow. There's a lot of variations. There's little bits of green, there's some orange, some brighter yellow, even a little bit of almost purple in some of the shadows. So don't be afraid to really explore the colors that you can put into it. I really like this. It's almost like a muted chartreuse that I get from those yellows in the cerulean. And now, did you see I was scumbling it ever so slightly over the transition between the shadow and the highlight? And that's going to start pushing that shadow back into its place. Little PR 101 to really warm this color up. Shift it ever so slightly away from green and push it a little bit more toward a shadow color with some of that ultramarine. Nice shadowy color. Much nicer. A very light touch there. I'm letting my brushwork show because the pears have a little bit of texture to them, whether it's dense or just, you know, variations in the skin, whatever. Let your brush mark work for you. Don't try to get rid of all of your brush marks. You're going to end up making your pears look way too smooth. I love all these variations in color. I think that's what really gives them some good depth. Just really look at your image and decide how is it that these pears look round. Notice where on the pears the highlights are. Are they closer to one edge than the other? Is the brightest highlight in the center of the shape? Is it slightly off center? Just notice all those things and then try to emulate that with your brushwork. Put the color roughly where you see it in the image. Kind of adjusting the outer edge shape of my pear here. And going over top of that shadow transition to soften it a little bit. See, that's a perfect example of what I said, where I said that each layer is probably going to be a little bit too much, but your next layer is going to help push that back. So that shadow layer was definitely too much, but it's okay because my next layer pushes it back. If that shadow layer weren't too much, I would almost lose all of my shadow layer here. So it's better to go a little too much than just right or not enough. Let's really darken that. Just more of that PR 101 and ultramarine. But there's still all those colors, that green on my brush. See, remember that shadow? I said it looked like it had been run over by a truck and sat rotting in a parking lot for a month. But now this shadow color has a little bit more vibrancy, a little more life to it. And so even though that first shadow color that was too dark and too green is still there and it's still showing through, it works better now because the shadow is not all green or all orange. And darker still right here underneath, in the darkest area. Not keeping a sharp edge between the pear and the plate on this one. And very lightly scumbling some of this color even over the lightest area, just for that texture, that little bit of texture. And I think it brings a little bit of harmony as well. All right, on to my number 4, some alizarin, some ultramarine, and I'm going to make the darkest color for the shadows on my cloth. So I know that the PR 101 nudges the ultramarine toward gray, and the alizarin kind of nudges it toward purple, and I think that all of that together kind of pushes this toward a nice, transparent, dark, dark, dark color. Just nudging it into this darkest area. I'll adjust the camera angle in a second here. Let's make it a little bit bluer. Blue really helps shadows kind of read a little bit more. Little raw umber. So color mixing is not about, remembering which colors to mix to get this or that. It's simply about appraising what's on your palette and thinking where it is that you need it to go, and grabbing the color that you feel like is going to put it where you need it to go. And you don't have to memorize that. Once you've got the experience with your colors and you know how they affect each other, you really will be able to start just mixing on the fly without thinking about it, which is kind of what I'm doing here. And it's a little bit challenging to teach because there's not really a lot of rhyme or reason as to why I'm grabbing something. My head said, this color is going to do the trick. Okay, that color didn't do the trick. This color is going to do the trick. And then I really do end up with just this muddy mess of paint. But sometimes mud is exactly the color that you want. So I'm not afraid of mud at all. I know some artists are, you don't want mud, don't mix mud, whatever. I don't know. Sometimes mud is exactly the color you want. One man's mud is another man's perfect color. That's what I think. But now I think you can see how dark this color is and how it's really bringing some depth and dimension to those shadows. And in doing so, it's making our highlights stand out a little bit more. Really keep a nice dark shadow there between the plate and the fabric. It makes sure that there are two different elements. See, I even just let the shadow there on the fabric blend into the grapes. I don't need to have a hard line there. Just a little bit of a dry brush to blend it up into these lighter colors. Just dry brushing some of this dark color into a few areas. A little bit of cerulean, a little bit of PR 101. Remember, the cerulean just offers really nice, soft gray tones to warm colors, because I don't want the shadow on this plate to be black, so that cerulean just helps keep it from being black while still allowing it to be a nice chromatic color, a nice dark, almost chromatic black color. And I am blending that into the pear. I'm taking this color up into the pear, even though it's the shadow color for the plate. And again there, blending that color up into the grapes. I have no need for definition between the grapes and the shadow. Throw a little bit of white into that color, just to blend. There's a little bit of the blue still showing on my plate, so I'm just kind of blending that shadow into an area that's a little tiny bit lighter and getting rid of a bit of that blue that's showing. If some of the blue still shows, that's okay. I'm not worried about it. That's why I added the blue, because I thought that it would offer a nice complement to the shadows. A little more cerulean in there to get that soft gray color. And we'll lighten it just a little bit more. Maybe a lot a bit more. Because we want to start working on this edge of the plate. Give it a nice glow on this one side. So I'm just crisping it up a little bit more, making sure its placement and shape and everything is what I want. Just a suggestion of this lighter color around the back here. I don't want that too light. It's around the back of the fruit, so it's taking a bit of shadow, but I didn't really have it defined very well, so I'm really just kind of smoothing it out and defining it. I believe I scumble a bit of a darker color over top of it in a little bit. Just mixing some white right into that color that's on my brush. And it's highlight time on the edge of that plate. Dropping that color down. Picked up a tiny bit of matte medium because that helps smear the paint a bit. There we go. Just the same color, just adding little hints of it here, not painting in this whole plate edge, this bright color. It's just a suggestion of the highlight around here. darken that a bit. That color was quite purple, so I just added a little bit more of the blue and brown to gray it back down a bit. Didn't have a very defined line right there for the edge of my plate. And I know that the edge of my plate, it's a little thicker in some places, it's a little thinner in some places, but I kind of like that because it looks like kind of a rustic, almost like a handmade plate. It doesn't look all machined, and I like that. I was tempted at one point to really get in there and crisp up those lines and make sure that the edge of the plate was the same width all the way around, but ultimately I just really liked it the way that it looked, so I left it. And I hope that you feel comfortable to do that in your painting too. If you have something in your painting that you like, even if it doesn't look anything like the image, or you think, oh, somebody's going to interpret that as a mistake. If you like it, please leave it. Don't paint for anyone but yourself. Trust me, I know it's not good for you to only ever paint thinking about what others are going to think about your painting. And if I can find the place to do that, being that my paintings are very public, then you, in the privacy of your own home, you can absolutely paint for no other person than yourself. You only have to make yourself happy. If nobody else likes your paintings, so what? Don't show them to anybody else. Keep them for yourself. Or, paint, enjoy, and then start them on fire. It's the painting and the doing that you should enjoy. Just grabbed some of that yellow again. I did clean off my brush. I'm just reshaping that pear, the tip of this pear. It got a little weird there, and honestly, when I look at the finished painting, I still wish I would have put just a couple more brush strokes into the end of that pear, and I may still go back and do that, because the very end of that pear does kind of bug me just a little bit. Just working on the intricacies of the shadows and the way that they blend into the highlights. More yellow, more PR 101, nice warm color. A little ultramarine to gray it down a bit. Ultramarine and cadmium yellow are not really going to give you a super vibrant green, because the ultramarine has a lot of red in it, and that drabs down green. But I'm adding a little bit of Naples yellow to it now to lighten the color, but without making it, I feel like white sometimes makes yellow look a little Easter eggy, and so I wanted to lighten it but keep some life to it. So I used Naples yellow instead of white. You could just use white, just be aware of how much white you're using. For me, Naples yellow is one of those colors that is super important. Super, super important. You can get away without using it, but I think you'd be much happier with it. Just looking for a color of yellow that's pale but vibrant and a little different than anything else that I have on there. So I'm just grabbing all the different colors that I like to use in my pear and mixing up a color and finding a place for it. So again, don't worry about the exact mixtures. If you didn't catch exactly what it was that I was doing, just kind of look at the color that I'm using and the colors that you're using and figure out, how can I get something similar, or how can I just get something that I like. I realize if you've never painted like this before, this may seem overwhelming and confusing, but I think that if you give it a chance, watch through the video, try it a couple of times, And stick with me because I will be painting like this quite a bit. I think that it won't take too long before it will start to kind of click and you'll start to become a little more comfortable with it. Everything brand new is super uncomfortable and confusing at first, but I promise that you can get it. Like I said, when I first learned how to paint like this, I thought that's just chaos. How will I ever know what I'm supposed to be doing, you know, painting like this? But when I decided to come back to making videos, I did actually start this painting. I did put some pure white in there this time. I'm trying to go quite a bit lighter. I did start this painting and I tried to paint it the way that I used to, you know, just put out this color. Okay, now I need this color. Now I need this color. And that quickly got confusing for me because I couldn't make snap decisions. I couldn't just decide, oh, I need some cerulean for this color. And I knew that if suddenly, while I'm painting yellow pears, if cerulean showed up on my palette, you might be like, what is going on there? So I did start the painting. I got about halfway through it and it looked horrible because I wasn't painting in a way that was comfortable for me. And so I had to stop and I regrouped and I came back at it the way that I do paint. And then I was finally successful. But you are welcome to continue painting the way that you do. You know, if you want to watch through this and decide, okay, I'm not going to use that color, I'm not going to use those colors, I'm going to use these colors, and then just start and approach it the way that you always do, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that you'll pick some things up, you know, and eventually you might think, well, maybe I'll try that. And who knows what you'll start learning and how your art might change. Just be open to new things. That's all I'm asking. I love that little highlight area right there on this pear. It really gives that part of the pear some body. I like that this pear is a little irregular shaped. He's got a little bit of a shoulder going on there, but sometimes pears are shaped a little strange. Sometimes they do have little shoulders, or they're more round, or they have a longer neck. So, you know, your pears don't have to have this perfect shape, and they don't have to be identical to each other. Let them each have a little bit of personality. I warmed up this color with some Indian yellow and then some pure white. So this color is getting quite warm and quite light. And notice there, I am applying it a little bit thicker. When I use my brush flat like that, I'm applying paint and I can apply it quite thick. And then I tip it onto the edge just to break up hard lines. Clean brush, mixing up some Pure 101 with just a little bit of ultramarine to knock down the vibrancy and darken it a bit. And I'm going back into my shadow and pulling some of that warmth out into the pear as well. This is going to start looking kind of like those bruises. The pears in the image have a lot of those like scratch marks and bruise marks, and so that's kind of what I'm going for here. That little bit of ultramarine really helps push this warm color into a nice natural gray zone. I do use those two colors together a lot. They work so well together. You'll probably see me use those two colors together in almost every painting I do, so you'll become very, very familiar with them. This shadow color is a little cooler. It's a little more ultramarine in it. So I'm being very delicate with it because it's quite dark, as you can see there. Slightly dry brushing it over top of the pear just to keep that texture in. I'm applying almost no paint at all, but it's definitely doing the trick. And darker still, more ultramarine. Tiny bit of water, just mixing it in with that paint. Now I'm gonna flick. There was not enough water there, so I got kind of like a splatter, which is okay. But I'm gonna go into some more water, mix it back into that paint. Flick again, looking for just a hint of texture, wiping out some of those little splatters with my hand. Just keep your eye on the wall and stuff, and if you get something on the wall, just wipe it off real quick. And more water. If you're getting these long, kind of soupy lines when you're flicking, you don't have enough water in it, so just get a little bit more. I just like the little splatters because they give some really nice natural texture. And then where I get it on my finger, I'm just taking that paint that's on my finger and wiping it into some of the areas too. See right there, that little dark splatter. I'm down to a small round brush. I think it's my number 5 round brush. And just a dark color. Oh no, this is my number 2. Sorry, this is my smallest one. My smallest brush. Just creating that stem. It's kind of a broken line. It's not real distinct. It's a little puffy on the end where it broke off of the tree. Lighten that color just a little bit. Keep it on the brown side. Just a bit of a highlight on there so it's not just a screeched black line. And let's find our final highlights for our pear. Just some nice bright and warm colors. Some actual white. Tiny bit of matte medium just to keep the paint fluid. Nice fat brush stroke. There's texture to that brush stroke, and I'm just breaking the lines, the outer edges of it, not spreading that paint around anymore. I like the nice little highlight right there at the top too. And a hint of a highlight down the edge. Very light texture. I'm barely touching, so I'm getting just kind of some scratchy texture with this light color, and I really, really like that. Just get this darker color that's a little bit muddy. We are almost done with the pears. All right, clean brush, and I just picked up some white, plopped it into that yellow area, and then picked it back up. So there's just a very slight mixture of those yellow colors with the white, so it's not pure white. I plop the color down quite thick, and I'm just breaking the line. I'm only putting this brighter color where I really want your attention in the pears. All right, this is my number 10 bright, and I'm gonna get some cad red, some ultramarine, which kind of dried out because I let my palette go moldy and had to clean it again. Don't let your palette go moldy. This is also the next day. Again, I'm just looking for that dark wood color, whatever it takes to give you a color that to you looks like wood. Yeah, so I had to clean my palette again, and I had to leave the paint sitting out, so a lot of my paint's dried out, so you'll see me struggling with that a little bit here. We're gonna finish up our table. I'm just applying this dark color to the edge here. It's very warm, but very dark. It's got that cad red base with a little PR 101 and a little bit of the ultramarine to nudge everything toward chromatic black. I like the idea of this table edge being a little worn, so I am gonna let it be a little wobbly on the top and bottom edge if it wants. Throw a little more ultramarine in there, nudge it closer toward black. A little more PR 101 for the same thing. A little bit of Titan green to kind of counteract any red in there. You can just use white. Again, I'm really just looking for a nice dark woody color, whatever that means to you. Your color mixture may be completely different, and I think this is a little pink for me, but it's fine for now. I just go with it. But it's a little on the pink side for me. I find that if I have started laying down the wrong color, for me, it's easier to just keep going with it, because if I lay down a brush stroke that's wrong and then, panic about it and go and remix the color, that color is still gonna show to some extent, and it's gonna look weird now because it only exists in that one space. Or I'm gonna have to apply my paint too thick to really mask it, and then it looks weird anyway. So for me, it's easier to just go ahead and stick with the color even if it's wrong, because I know I'm gonna put another layer over it and that will take care of the weird color. So yeah, learn to pick your battles. I think that fighting with a color that's a little bit wrong is more work than just going with it. Throw a little Naples in there to warm up the color, nudge it toward yellow a bit and lighten it a little. But that ultramarine is going to help nudge it more toward gray to try and get rid of some of that red that was in there. And the cerulean is really going to help with that too. So my cerulean is really dried out. But yeah, let me know if you'd like some information on wet palettes, if you'd like to know how to set one up, how to maintain it, all of that stuff. And I can definitely, like I said, either make a video or a blog post, something to give you that information. All right, I've got this lighter kind of wood color, and I like that color a lot better. Just dusting it over that color, that kind of pink color. And I think it already is making it look better. am painting a little wet into wet because that first wood color I put down is still wet. But if yours has dried, that's fine. Don't worry about that. More cerulean, pushing it much more toward gray. A little bit of white because it's a bit highlighted in there. There's some light reflecting off of the tabletop. A little more Naples in there. See how I dropped it down into the color and then picked it up across? It gives me that marbled paint on the end of my brush, so it's not like a solid mixture. I really like that. And I'm just giving the edge of the table here some worn looks. Maybe it's been, you know, bonked over the years and dented or whatever. Gray it down again. Just finding some texture in here. I picked up a little bit of matte medium because that helps the paint on my brush smear in really transparent ways. So it helps me blend a little bit. So if you find that you're putting down a brush stroke and that brush stroke is too distinct, then just pick up a tiny point of matte medium and then do it again. And I think you'll see these nice transparent smears in your paint colors. I like that. I think that looks really natural and kind of rusticy and vintage. Back to my number 4. Nice warm gray color with the PR101 and a little bit of ultramarine. Just gonna get some shadow color in this wood. I left it warm toward the PR101 because this is wood. And I really want to get this color right here under the edge of the towel so that the towel is casting a bit of a shadow. That's what's going to help it feel like it has some body and it's not laying pressed flat to the table. A little bit bluer and therefore darker. And right in here, nice deep dark shadow underneath that towel. Clean brush. This is I think it's my number 6. Alizarin and ultramarine. Now we're gonna start working on our grapes. A little bit of raw umber to gray that purple down. I don't want it to be too vibrantly purple. You can just use Diox purple if you like. The reason I'm not using purple out of the tube is because I can't shift it. I can't make it more red or more blue. It's just purple, so that's why I like to use the 2. I put a little cerulean in there instead of white because the cerulean will lighten it a bit, but not like white will. Now I'm really carving out the shapes, making sure I've got some very distinct grape shapes up in here. Not worried about what's going on inside this shape, just getting some nice specific grape shapes on the profile. Don't get real phony with this. Don't make it, you know, just a big shape full of baubles that are all the same size and shape and evenly spaced. Give some areas, you know, that kind of tuck in or are almost flat. A little bit of variation. And I'm just filling in this shape with that color because some of this paint is still a little thin and therefore lighter. So I'm just going to fill it in with this thicker, darker version of the color. And then we'll start doing some individual grapes. Also, what the cerulean is doing is making the color a little more opaque. So all of the colors that I'm using to mix this purple, the alizarin, the ultramarine, even the raw umber to an extent, they're pretty transparent. But the cerulean has some opacity to it. So it's just barely knocking in a bit of opacity to the paint, as well as lightening and graying it down ever so slightly. If you use white here, it's going to make it really a little more chalky, and it's going to bring out the purple. I threw just a little bit of the Titan Violet in there to lighten it even more, but without that chalkiness that just straight titanium white can give. Now look at how I'm doing the grapes here. I'm almost doing like a half moon, just kind of a half moon shape, and I'm not doing, you know, circle, 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 circle. I'm kind of just picking areas throughout. Some of the grapes on the outer edge are getting that half circle treatment, and then I just kind of pick a spot within and give that half circle treatment. And as I go, sometimes these shapes are going to have to bump up against each other, and one of them might not be a half circle. It might be just a little touch of the color because it's up against another grape. And I'm being very selective. I'm definitely not going to describe every single grape in this bunch. Your brain knows what's going on. You give a few areas with a little bit of detail, and your brain fills in the gaps and everything else. The areas that are left dark, your brain is going to interpret as deeper areas where maybe there's some shadow or there's not as many grapes there. So you don't have to describe everything to get the point across. More cerulean. Let's really get this pretty cool gray tone in there. And then I lightened it just a tiny bit with a little bit of Titan Violet. Just a small brush stroke here. Every time I go lighter, my brush stroke is a little bit smaller. And I'm not going to do as many of the shapes with this lighter color. But I'm also not worried about doing too much. Again, it's about shape, color, value, and then watching where your hard and soft edges are. It's not about trying to, you know, say, how am I going to make this look like 3D grapes? Don't think of it as grapes. It's some really soft and chalky purple swoops. That's about it. All right, I did add some titanium white to that mixture and made it quite a bit lighter, but watch what I'm going to do. I'm just kind of touching, just a little bit. Remember, as it goes lighter, the brush strokes are smaller and we do less of it. Very, very soft. Smear it with your finger if you need to. See, that was just like a little point. Don't go crazy here and make these big purple or white, you know, circles. It's just going to look phony. some of the areas where I have just darkness, where I didn't describe any grapes, I'm just going to add a tiny point of this lighter color. Just makes it feel like maybe there's a grape hiding deep down inside that's just barely catching a tiny bit of light. Like right there, and right there. Now, like I said, about each layer being just a little bit too much, don't be afraid if that got a little bit away from you, because we're going to glaze it a bit. This is my number 5 round, and I just picked up a little bit of white and a little bit of Titan violet and a tiny point of Naples yellow. I'm just looking for a very pale, warmer color. Tiny point of matte medium. And now I'm going to give some of these that brighter point that they have, but I'm wiping it out with my finger to keep that kind of chalky look. The outside of the grapes almost have a chalky look, even the ones that are shiny. So I kind of set down that brighter bit and then make it fuzzy around the edges. Soften that edge. Some of these definitely get away from me, but I'm not worried about it. Just picking up a point of matte medium because it helps with that, getting that kind of transparent, indistinct brush stroke that I was talking about with the wood on the table. A little more matte medium, keeping it nice and transparent there. Soft edge. Very transparent there. Mixed that matte medium in, so this color is very transparent. It doesn't look all that transparent when I'm applying it right now. That's mostly because the matte medium looks a little bit white when it's wet. All right, back to my number 4, a little alizarin, a little ultramarine, just a very small batch of color here. On that violet side, little matte medium, and I'm gonna glaze, just some of them. Don't go crazy and glaze the whole thing. It's kind of knocking back some of those areas that might have been too bright. It's changing the temperature on some of them, making them just a little bit more of a vibrant purple. So I'm not putting it on everything. And because it's so transparent, those two colors plus the matte medium, I'm not losing those highlights. Let's add some cerulean to it. Good amount of cerulean. It'll make it a little bit chalky. Tiny bit of that lighter color. And some matte medium to make it nice and transparent again. I'm going to glaze some other ones with this color. It's a little bit bluer, a little bit chalkier. And you could keep going and really make these grapes stand out as much as you want. I liked the idea of the grapes kind of receding into the background because I wanted the pears to really stand out, be center stage. And so I kept the grapes just a little more subdued than I think they even are in the image. I just didn't want them to compete with the pears, especially since the grapes are about in the center of the canvas. More matte medium, really make this light grayed down color transparent. That's what helps give the grapes that chalky feel. All right, back to my number 5 round. Some ultramarine, some raw umber, a nice chromatic gray, nice dark gray. Tiny bit of white. And I'm just mixing what's on my brush in there. So this white is just ever so slightly dirtied by that gray color. It's just not pure white. And I'm gonna punch in that final highlight on the plate. That kind of sets the base for it. Now I'm gonna go straight into my white and just grab a little blob. And I'm very light pressure adding that blob of pure white paint there. And that'll read as a nice bright highlight. Put that same color here on the edge of the towel to make that curl really stand out. A little bit here and there down that ripply edge. Don't just draw a big white line. Keep it special in just a few places. Just dirtying that color again. It was a little too bright for the towel. Just going down, almost like Morse code, just little deet deet deets down the edge of this towel. And just punching a couple highlights throughout the towel. And we are really almost done. I'm just going to accentuate the highlights throughout the towel here, and then we are done. So I hope that this was not too challenging for you guys, the new way of painting that I'm bringing to you. Please remember that these are kind of traditional painting techniques. With acrylic paint, a lot of times we don't use traditional painting techniques the way we have our palettes set up and the way we mix paints, simply because we don't really need to, or because our paints dry too fast and it's hard to keep all of this paint out on your palette. But I think that by using a wet palette, we can absolutely open ourselves up to much more mature painting techniques, which is really what I want to bring to you. I think that, you know, painting very simple paintings is a great way to get started, but to really start to develop our skill set, we have to start working into more mature paintings, and that requires more mature painting techniques. So that's what I hope to be bringing to you, and I realize that not everybody's ready for that, and not everybody wants that. But if you are open to those kind of painting techniques, then I hope that you will continue to join me, because I'm really excited to bring to you the things that I've expanded into over the last couple of years. You know, since I stopped making videos last year, I have really been pushing myself. I've been pushing myself really hard to learn new things and to grow as an artist. And that's what I really hope to bring to you guys with this as well. So I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope to see you next time for the next video. And let me know what questions you have about this process, and I will see what other videos I can make to help clarify any questions or issues that you might have had. So thank you so much for painting with me, everyone, and I will see you next time.